So welcome back to Grant Faulkner. I think
Absolutely.
Grant, the last time you spoke to this group was during COVID. Do you remember? In 2020. I went back and I had a look, and you were coming to talk to us about boosting our creative mojo during the shutdown because
Ooh.
it was a few years after you'd published your book Pep Talk for Writers.
Yeah.
And then, so this evening I went to have a look to dig through and just check dates and everything, and I realized that I'm wearing the same dress. So from
I,
now on, from
I
now
I know I'm not in the same shirt. I got this for Christmas,
on, from now I'm
but
going to
I
call this
could be
my
in the same
Grant.
clothes.
I'm going to call this my Grant dress. Anyway, at
Yeah.
the time you were ED for NaNoWriMo.
Hmm.
And so we were talking much more in the novel space, and I think most people in the room tonight will be novelists or aspiring novelists.
Okay.
Um, so just to give you some context for the discussion we're about to have, which is based much more on your most recent book, The Art of Brevity.
Hmm.
As I was saying, I've had like some people email me telling me how much they enjoyed that book. So
Oh, great.
the
Thank you.
kudos to you. But in many ways, it's returning you back to like kind of short stories have been part of what you've been doing since 2011, right? When you started a 100-word story with Lynn.
Hmm. Yep. I'm gonna give the full rundown when
Okay,
yeah.
I
But so I'll
won't.
tell the whole story
Okay,
as it relates to novels too. If people are tuning out because you're novelists, don't.
yeah, yeah.
This.
We always pick topics that apply to everybody. But
Hmm.
before I let you go and launch your workshop, I just wanted to ask you quickly. The last
Yeah.
time we spoke in person, you had been attempting a new first, and that was your first writers retreat. So how did that go?
Uh-huh. My God, it was so good. I can't
Yeah.
believe how good it was. It was like perfect. I felt like there was going to be some karma, some bad karma coming from the heavens because it just went too well. And yeah, it was just so people know, it was in this castle in Italy, about 45 minutes north of Turin, and it was just idyllic. And we had all these. I gained like the only thing I gained like 10 pounds. Seriously, I walked every day, but the food was just so bountiful.
Yeah.
And yeah, so we had this whole wing of the castle, and we did art and singing and writing, and yeah. So anyway, yeah, we're hopefully going to do it next year as well if anyone's interested. Yeah.
Well, that's great. And I have so far, I lead a retreat to Europe once a year, but so far we've been staying away from Italy for exactly that reason that I
Yeah.
don't think I
Oh,
can
the
go and come
food.
back in the same shape.
Yeah, the perils. Oh my God.
Yeah, but no, uh, we'd like to do that in 2020. In 2027, we're in Greece.
Hmm.
So my tip to you, Grant, is that every time I go to Greece, I eat whatever I want to eat. The food's fantastic, and I lose weight because it's so healthy.
Oh, wow. I was going to say we could team up on a retreat and we could call it Eat a Lot, Write a Lot.
Yes,
Do you think we'd get some? Yeah, we,
absolutely.
we have Rachel Hanna, I see.
Nodding away. Yes,
Yeah,
absolutely.
got Eileen Flynn also with a thumbs up. All right, we're going to do the Eat a Lot, Write a Lot retreat.
You heard it here first, folks.
To hell with fitness. The only
Okay,
the, the only fitness that matters is with your writing.
that's right. The Fit Creative Mojo. Um,
Hmm.
all right, so let me get out of your way. I'm going to unspotlight myself, and you can share your screen and welcome
I love
back.
that as a verb.
Always excited to
Unspotlight
have you.
myself. Unspotlight myself. Okay. Well, hello everybody. I haven't read the chat, so I haven't seen where everybody's coming from, but I'm coming from Berkeley, California. And I wanted to tell a little bit of my background to finding the short stuff, the short stories, the short stories. You can't have too many shorts as adjectives in front of the word story. Because, per the novelists in the room, I had been working on what I now call my doomed novel, off and on, but mainly on, for 10 years. And as you might imagine, that's a lot of it becomes kind of burdensome to carry it for that long. And I kept coming up with a new. Every time I finished a draft, I'd come up with a new idea for a revision that would finally make it work. And so I'd spend the next year or two doing that revision, and then it wasn't quite there. I think in the end, I stopped truly believing in it. But the fortunate thing, you never know where your paths lead. And my path to short stories was one night late at night after maybe one too many glasses of wine at midnight. I clicked on a link on Facebook, and it took me to my best friend Jake. His father, Paul Strom, who's a Chaucerian and was a professor at Columbia and also wrote fiction on the side, he had written this wonderful memoir in 100 word stories. And when I read his stories, I was just enchanted by the form because there were these snapshots of life, It was like these snapshots that just bloomed up on every page. And I started to think this is the way I think and remember life, is with this collage of snapshots. And I thought what it allowed him to do as a memoirist is capture all these tiny moments, but not tiny as tiny in significance. They were tiny moments that were significant. They weren't the tiny moments that one would tell a story about at a dinner party. They were usually intimate. I mean, sometimes they were. But yeah, so I just thought it was such an interesting way to write. And so I decided to take a break from my big doomed novel. I hadn't called it doomed at that time, by the way. I still was hopeful about it. And but yeah, I started writing them, and initially I got them. I'd write. I did it fictionally, not memoiristically. But I could only get them down to about 150 words, and that's because I think we're largely trained to write long. It's super hard to write short, even though writing short is one of the key writing skills to be a good writer, even if you're writing novels. And I'll kind of get into that with the class today. And yeah, so when I told Paul and saw him the next time, I was like, hey, I've been writing these stories kind of like yours, 150 words long. And he was like, no, 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 no. You got to get them down to exactly 100 words, and then they will be better. Now, 100 is not a magical number. He could have said 93 words. He could have said 105 words. The premise, though, is that you're writing within the rigid sides of a container. It's a kind of unforgiving yet generous container. It's a paradoxical container, because the irony is that constraints bring out a different type of creativity, and we're going to go more deeply into this. And I learned a lot of things about how to tell a story by writing within this hard, fixed limit. And that was things, for instance, as the art of omission, that a story actually becomes more evocative when you leave things out. It takes a lot of practice, though, in order to know what to leave out and how to evoke the story. But that's the other part of it, too, is that the text you use on the page, it's like you're dropping little hints, and the thing is like when people read the stories, they're filling in a lot of those gaps with their imagination. So it becomes quite a different reading experience. And then another good thing about it for novelists is that by taking a break, and I tell people, actually, writing in different genres is wonderful for your writing. And when I took a break from my novel by writing these little short stories, what it gave me was the satisfaction of finishing something. If you've been working on a novel for a long time, it's frustrating because you haven't finished it, and it's a long time you have to work on it. So I ended up getting kind of antsy, and these stories it was just wonderful to finish something. And that was wonderful to send it off, and in many cases I got something published. And so all of that gave me more creative fuel for my novel. And, I think in the end, too, another benefit for my novel was it taught me how to write with suspense, because suspense is all about not telling everything. And again, that's something we tend not to learn in writing. We tend to learn how to write longer and explain things. So with that in mind here, I'm going to share my screen. I have this little deck. We're going to do a little bit of writing tonight and explore this form. And yeah, so sometimes less is truly more. That's my premise. And just wanted to show a few books in case you haven't seen them. This is my book, The Art of Brevity, which is really, I mean, it's a one part craft book, but it's also one part kind of meditation or reflection on the aesthetic of brevity. Because it's an aesthetic of brevity. The ironic thing about this is that writing all the short stories ended up coming back and influencing my longer work. So I'm always writing with an aesthetic of brevity, even when I'm writing longer things. And that's one of the beauties of it for me. I ended up writing my own book of 100 word stories, 100 of them in this book, Fissures. It's fiction, not memoir, though. Some of my short stuff, this is a short story collection, but it includes Flash, all the comfort sync can provide. And then I do have a weekly Substack that I love to tell you about. So yeah, it's free and about all sorts of writing, publishing topics. So just wanted to let you know about that. And then here's 100 word story. So Shirin mentioned this. I founded this so that my one warning with this is that these 100 word stories get incredibly addictive. So you might leave this session completely addicted to them, and you won't look back. You'll ditch your novel and just write these. That's just a warning. So if you want to leave now, please do. So this is 100wordstory.org. We publish a story with photos. I'm really big on photos and storytelling and the presentation of them. We have a monthly photo prompt also that you can submit to on the site real time, and we publish our favorite one each month. And then here's my new book, Something Out There in the Distance. And when I was talking about photos, so my good friend Gail Butensky, who I waited tables with in the Mission in the early 90s, she's a wonderful photographer. And she gave me a bunch of her photos, maybe 30 or 40 of them. And I wrote little tiny stories to each one. And they're all linked photos. So each photo goes with each story, or each story goes with each photo. And they're about these two characters, Johnny and Don, who are taking this wild and reckless road trip through the Southwest. So yeah, so that's another way that the short form can turn into the long form, is when you link stories together. So I want to start it off. I oftentimes get midway through a talk, and I've been using the word flash fiction a lot, and people are like, "What is flash fiction?" So I think we got to get grounded in that. Does anyone have a definition of flash fiction? And just come off mute and mention it if you can. I can't see you all, so
It's less than 1,000 words, sometimes up to 1,500. Between 750 and 1,000, up to 1,500.
yeah, there are different definitions out there. The most conventional definition is under 1,000 words, which is about 4 pages of writing, so pretty short. Some people play with that, though. It's somewhat elastic. I think some people do push it longer. I wish they just push it shorter, though. I think if you have a short form, you don't need to push it longer. The beauty of the short form, as I mentioned, is in its containment. But it's a form with many labels. Like I think of it like as the ultimate metaphor for it is a Russian doll. If you've seen those, you take the big doll head off, and there's a smaller doll inside it. You take that off, and then there's a tinier one, and a tinier one, and a tinier one. You can never go too tiny, essentially. And so within this incredibly short form of 1,000 words or less, there's microfiction, which is 400 words or less. There's palm of the hand stories. This is like a metaphor. I like to think of it less in word count and more in metaphor. Yasunari Kawabata, the great Japanese writer who won the Nobel Prize, he preferred the short stories over the big stories. He, in fact, took his Nobel-winning novel, Snow Country, which is just amazing. And a couple months before he committed suicide, he condensed it and distilled the novel into 12 pages, and he called it Gleanings of Snow Country. It wasn't a summary of the novel. He just wanted to capture the essence of it. And so I love the metaphor of a palm of the hand story, because it's a story that fits in your palm. Smoke Long comes from, it's a great quarterly. Well, Smoke Long Quarterly, it's a great online magazine. It's more than quarterly. They publish all the time. So if you're interested in Flash, that's one go-to resource. But phrase or the word smoke along comes from Chinese factory workers in the 30s got one break a day, and their break was just long enough to smoke one cigarette. So the newspapers started publishing stories that were one cigarette long. So that's what a smoke long is and where it comes from. They're postcard stories. Sometimes when I teach in person, I'll have people write just a story, again, contained on the back of a postcard or note card. So containment of space. Drabble's another word for the 100-word stories. And then flash, the genre itself is a metaphor. And where that comes from is James Thomas. He and a couple others, but he was the main one who started popularizing Flash back in the 80s. There was no term for it before that, believe it or not. It seems very recent. But he started creating these anthologies of them. And initially he was calling them, and he still does. They've still come out. So if you want another go-to resource, look for those. He's called them all different things. But there's probably, I don't know, 8 or 9 anthologies. I think most of them are published by Norton. But he was calling them blasters back in the early 80s. Horrible word for a literary form. And he was talking to his wife, who'd helped him edit a couple of these, and he said, "We got to call them something else. What should we call them?" And then right now, literally, a lightning bolt struck outside their house in Ohio, and she said, "Call them Flash." And I love that story because, well, one, as I mentioned, it's the only genre I know of that's its label is a metaphor for it, and that's because you can think of it as this sudden bolt of illumination coming down from the sky. It's a very sudden moment that changes everything, and that's what a flash story is. It's a moment, and a powerful moment, oftentimes, but it's many things. Like as I said, I like thinking of it through metaphors. That helps me think of the shape of the story. So Laurie Moore wrote, "A short story is a love affair, a novel is a marriage, a short story is a photograph, a novel is a film." So again, that snapshot metaphor, which I really like. Kim McGowan, who's a local Bay Area writer, she said if Flash were a food item, it would be a bouillon cube. So something really tightly compacted, yet flavorful. And then Dorothy Parker, she didn't say this about Flash, but she said brevity is the soul of lingerie. And I love lingerie as a metaphor for Flash because lingerie, it titillates, it teases, it invites one in, but it doesn't reveal, or it only reveals a little bit, or enough, right? It reveals enough that you want to enter its story. I think that's the premise of lingerie. And let's see, I got to advance the slide here. Roland Barthes said, "Is not the most erotic portion of the body where the garment gapes." And I love this too because it really is true. And the reason that's true is because where the garment gapes invites us in to use our imagination, just like lingerie. And that's kind of the premise of Flash. It's dropping hints, but you have to use your imagination. The reader is kind of a collaborator. So I want to open it up again. We have, there's so many cliches in America. Less is more is one of them. And I think what happens with cliches is that we don't really question them. We just say them. So why is less more? Why is less more? How can it be more when it's less? Anybody have any thoughts?
I just have a thought that for me, less is more because it allows me to experience more of what is around me in it, ironically, because I know where to focus.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot to be said with that. As I look around my very cluttered house here, I have
It's an
no idea.
ideal.
Yeah, it's an ideal. But you're right. Yeah, it helps you focus. Anybody else?
I just had the idea that less is more inclusive in a way, and
Mm.
more is kind of exclusive. Less allows collaboration, and more doesn't seem to.
And why is that? Why does more not allow for collaboration?
Well, it's often sort of the paternal voice, telling. and
Hmm.
doesn't allow like the young voice to kind of show a different reality or a different eye on something.
Yeah, that's interesting. I have a part of one chapter is kind of about that, how a lot of our forms are much more authoritarian because they're telling people what to think and they're guiding the reader, and flash fiction is less authoritarian because the reader is a collaborator. So I think that is that what you're getting at?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I think it's more risky actually
Hmm.
to yeah, it takes less risk to tell, I think.
I think you're right. I mean, that's what I like to think too. It's a riskier form just on premise, because you're not doing so much telling. Well, thanks for that. That was great. Um,
I have one.
so,
I have one point,
oh, sure.
Grant.
I can't see everybody. I'm sorry. So go
Oh,
ahead.
okay. No, somehow I don't know why I keep thinking that I like flash fiction because it's not boring, and I don't know what the word boring just comes into my mind because I can put all kinds of things in those spaces, ideas, and it's more exciting.
More exciting because it invites you in, it sounds like.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll hold that thought for this question. So, we're all storytellers, we're all writers, we want to write stories. So I think Flash also invites a definition of what is a story and perhaps a redefinition of what is a story. And so I'm thinking of like the basic Western culture definition of story, which is change in the passage of time, usually character change, something that has a beginning, middle, and end with conflict or obstacles of one character's desire and how do they get over those obstacles or not. And so this is a famous six-word story that I bet most of you have already encountered, supposedly written by Ernest Hemingway when he was challenged in a bar to write the shortest story he could. And he wrote, "For sale, baby shoes, never worn." So, is that a story? And if so, why?
I feel like it's a story because it gives you enough information that the reader can sort of project onto it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, a whole big story. So, for me, I haven't seen this before, by the way,
Mm.
but for me, when I see this, I just think, okay, tragedy, somebody either lost a baby or a baby died, or, and I start to fill in with details that obviously come from within me somewhere
Mm-hmm.
in things
Mm-hmm.
I think about.
Cool. Any other thoughts?
Um, I would say it's interesting because the six words might not be a story according to all those things that you said just now, Grant, about, what a sort of, like our Western idea of what a story is. But I think at the end of it, it probably evokes the same emotion and reaction in the reader that it would if it was like the entire plot of what happened.
Mm-hmm.
And there's that element of sort of mystery and um, the unknown, and I think that makes the emotion even stronger.
That's interesting. Yeah, I sometimes have wanted this to be the first line in a novel. And so if you think about it having 300 or 400 pages following it, I think that's getting at what you're saying is that might be the type of more that, you know, that takes away the mystery, that takes away the way it evokes what you're saying, that your feelings are more poignant without that 300 pages. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Because then I can bring more of my own self and my own experience, like what Rachel was saying. I can fill in some of those gaps that are so, are probably more personal to me than it would have been had I read the 300 pages about this other character
Mm-hmm.
in a fictional life or whatever.
So there's definitely more ambiguity. You said what's personal for me. I sometimes like to put it out there that maybe the baby just had enormously enormous feet. Just like wildly big feet that didn't fit into baby shoes, which changes the genre, I think, that most of us read it as. I think most of us are reading this as a tragedy, not as a surrealist comedy. So anyway, yeah, so which is to say that I think you're entirely right, but I think like because of the brevity, part of the risk as an author is that we are letting the reader has a much bigger role in determining meaning than with other stories because they're filling in the gaps with their personal thoughts. Well, we're going to write a 6-word story. I'm curious. Well, I'll ask this later. I'll put the screen up so I can see everybody. But I thought, like, I'm going to give you like 5 minutes to write one. But I thought we could warm up. And by the way, that's only 1.2 words a minute, so it's pretty doable. And so I thought we could read some just to kind of warm up and get you thinking of what you might write. So, revenge is living well without you. Joyce Carol Oates. I love that comma, which makes it so dramatic. I love how she's working with the cliche. What is it? The best revenge is living well? Yeah, but the without you is a big punch. I still make coffee for two. I love this because it's an absence and a presence at the same time. Sigrid Nunez said that all stories were about loss. So this is about loss. Could be a divorce, could be death, who knows? Loss of a friendship. Andy Young said, fact checker by day, liar by night. I like this because it speaks to the contradictions of humanity, how many of us are two things at once that are opposed to each other. Also, it doesn't have a verb, so you can kind of think about this in terms of like story structure. Just fact checker by day, liar by night. Abigail Morehouse wrote, barrister, barista, what's the diff, Mom? I like this because it's sassy and it has voice, and you can hear this kind of snotty teenager talking to her mom like this. And then barrister actually kind of puts her in a different place. Kimberly Kilroy wrote, still fit into high school earrings. And I love this because usually we think about fitting into a dress, like an old wedding dress or a prom dress or something. But fitting into high school earrings isn't about your body size, it's about your style or who you are. So I think that that's like an interesting kind of drama. And then Caroline Richardson, she actually wrote this during the pandemic. For sale, prom dress, never worn. So she took Hemingway's famous story and just reinterpreted it in a very interesting and poignant way, especially when you know it's from the COVID era. So, I want you all to write a 6-word story. And I'm going to give you 5 minutes. You can share. We can have like 3 or 4 people share if you want. Optional, of course. And sometimes people write 3 or 4 of them and pick the one they like. Sometimes people just sit with one. It is, I find it very challenging to do, but fun. And in classes like this, I always hear the most amazing ones. So, any questions about that? Sounds like no, so I'm going to set my timer. And I'll be back in 5 minutes. I just have to take care of my dog a little bit. And we're at time. I thank you, Shirin, for inviting people to post in chat. That's one beauty of doing this exercise is that everyone can share. So if you haven't already done that, please do, or feel free to. And I just wanted to point out one. Carol, I laughed when I read this. He was there. Our team lost. I know you're a Knicks fan. I'm not going to reveal who the he was. But yeah, let me see. I wanted to ask people: have people written 6 word stories before, or just basically how did that feel to write a story in such a compact form?
It's challenging at first. You're used to using a lot more words.
Yeah, I oftentimes offer people the chance to buy extra words for $50 each. That's how I pay my rent. Um, yeah, yeah. We're not taught to write that short. It's always a challenge for me, especially when like the seventh word feels perfect, but sometimes like that the more you think about it, sometimes you can make it 6 words and make it more perfect. Put it that way.
I was
Yeah.
wondering if contractions were allowed.
Yeah. You know what? When we do the 100 word story, people often ask how we count, and we count them by Microsoft Words count. And Microsoft Word counts a contraction as 1 word. So that's one way to trim your stories. Yeah. Any other thoughts about a 6 word story? Does anyone want to read theirs?
I'll read mine,
Okay.
just a couple of them, because they are much harder than I thought. Um, one is leaking amniotic fluid while making coffee.
I love that.
Another one is promise to get her daughter, comma, broken.
Mm.
Um, and then a third is whenever they arrive, she is erased.
Hmm.
Ooh.
Yeah. Very dramatic. I love that comma broken too. Really lets that pain linger in the air. Anybody else?
I have one.
Yeah.
So I found love, it lost me.
Wow. I love that story construction of the two opposing phrases and the found and lost.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's the definition of drama right there. And per the Sigrid Nunez quote that all stories are about loss. I'm not sure if that's true, by the way. I think about it a lot, though. So I think it's worth thinking about. Well, thank you so much. I want to, the next step is I need to give you your flash fiction certificates. You've now passed the course. You now have everything you need to know about writing flash, and that's like telling a story with hints, telling a story with omission, inviting the reader in as co-writer, using constraints to enhance creativity, and writing towards the mystery and the breadth of a story. It's really those, 5 things more or less. And I think like working with like 6 word stories. I mean, I started with 100 word stories, but the shorter the form is actually, I think, the better way is to write it super short and then work up, to the longer stories, and longer meaning 1,000 words. Shirin asked me to leave 30 minutes for questions, but I think I can just do this next segment in about 15 minutes, and then I'd love to. I love Q&As basically, so I want to talk about the creative powers of constraints because I mentioned that earlier. What do you think of when you think of the word constraint? What does it mean to you? Connotations or denotations?
I'm going to jump in here and say what it does is 2 things for me. One is that you're putting limits on something,
Mm-hmm.
whether that's by rules or by whatever. But it also is very freeing. I mean,
Mm.
saying write a 6-word story. That's a constraint in itself.
Right.
And I remember when I was teaching, and I came in with the more constrained the form was that I put in front of them, like a sing queen or something like that, the better were the results that came out of it. So for me, constraint is both limiting and freeing at the same time.
Yeah, that's a good definition. Anybody else? Eric.
The audio is working? Yes?
It's working, yeah.
Okay, great. I love the short form, been writing in it for a long time. But for me, constraints are, pick up on the previous speaker, are freeing because it eliminates choice. I can't write too much. I can't go off on tangents. I am forced by the constraints to stay within the focus of what it is that I'm supposed to be writing.
That's a good point. When I mentioned my Doom novel earlier, part of the doom of it was that I could always think of a new plot line to chase, infinitely, right? Borges wrote a lot about this, how a single story has infinite possibilities. And a short form does too in its way, but I think like it gives you more focus, and you kind of hone in on the focus when you're writing them, or that's what I find that I do too. And that's why, like, when I said earlier that writing 100-word stories versus 150-word stories, because it was that constraint that made me, every word counts. You can't have a flabby sentence. You have to nail the language, the ending. There are all these elements of storytelling that are heightened for you when you have that focus. So thanks for mentioning that. So here's the irony of constraints. I think, as you guys said, they can spark creativity. Shirin Yim said, "I guess the challenge has always been for me, the most interesting challenge is how do you take a constraint and turn it into an opportunity to make something really unique in the world." And I think that's the thing. How do you make that constraint into freedom, as one person mentioned? The poet Paul Muldoon said, "Form is a straitjacket in the way that a straitjacket was a straitjacket for Houdini." And I love this because it really brings it to life. Houdini was famous for escaping, traps, from, getting out of being locked up or getting out of a straitjacket. And Houdini said, "Some say I do it this way, others say I do it that way, but I say I do it the other way." And a constraint invites you to really think about the other way of telling a story. And that's why I mentioned earlier that when I asked what is a story, or is that Hemingway story a story, flash fiction invites different ways of telling a story, different notions of plot. It can free you up because it's such a short thing. You don't have the burdens of plot. You don't have the burdens of explanation. So you're using different ways of telling a story. And there are just this rich tradition of writing constraints. Sometimes we forget about them, but we did 6-word stories, 100-word stories. Poetry it abounds with different forms, with different rhyme schemes, or different lengths, like sonnets and villanelles and haikus. When Twitter first came out, when it was kind of good and playful and fun, there was a form called Twiction, and people like Jennifer Egan actually wrote a whole novel in tweets. It invited a lot of different playfulness with language because of the constraints. Just to name a couple different forms here, the Apocydarius. It's an alphabet story, so 26 sentences, and each sentence starts with the next letter of the alphabet. So the first letter of the first sentence starts with an A, or the first word. The first word, the second sentence starts with a B, and so on. So yeah, but it like the person who said it's limiting but freeing, I think there's a freedom that follows that limitation. And then this is a very macabre example, but Robert Owen Butler wrote this collection of 62 short shorts called Severance. And I guess that at least this is the theory, if not the fact, that when a person is beheaded by guillotine, they have 90 seconds of consciousness, more or less.
Oh, yeah.
So he wrote about these 62 people. I'm not sure if they were historically accurate or not, but just their last thoughts in those 90 seconds. Maybe the ultimate moment of drama, I guess. So this comes from my book, but I think of the various forms of flash fiction as just kind of a series of differently sized pots, or fiction in general. The size of the pot determines what kind of plant you can plant in it and what form it will take. A big pot might have a ficus tree, but another, they sell those little pots with just a single tiny succulent in it. So they're different types of stories. Stuart Diebeck, who is a great flash fiction writer, he said, part of the fun of writing them is the sense of slipping between the seams. Within the constraint of their small boundaries, the writer discovers great freedom. In fact, the very limitations of scale also demand unconventional strategies. And the unconventional strategies, this is one reason I love flash fiction, is that it invites a different type of playfulness with the form or the container or the pot you put a story in. And so, for instance, my friend Sean Lovelace, who's a flash fiction writer, he found himself writing a lot of complaint letters, like he was angry at the service he got from, say, United or something. And he found, the more he thought about these complaint letters, the more he thought that they were kind of like dramatic monologues, that they were these little stories that revealed things about him that maybe he wasn't even intending. And so he started writing these farcical complaint letters. Like he wrote, this was for fiction, not for reality, but he would write a complaint letter about a Charms blow pop and how it was blemished and defective and hurt him and whatever. They would be farcical and fun. And, I did a series of them for online shoe reviews. I bought my first pair of shoes on the internet. This was years ago. And because I was very nervous about buying shoes on the internet, I read all the shoe reviews, and I found the same thing. Every shoe review was like a little dramatic monologue, a little story where the person revealed something about themselves, or they were a cook or an overworked mother or somebody, And so anyway, I wrote a series of those shoe reviews as a kind of form or container. My friend Kim McGowan, who I mentioned earlier, she wrote a great story in the Mad Lib form. We're going to read that. A lot of people use lists as stories, which is a really great form of storytelling. I write a lot of lists, especially when I'm waiting in the grocery store line, just for fun. One person I know wrote, and it's too bad because it's hard to present this online, but it's a flow chart. So he had the story was like, he asked a question up top, and then if you answered yes, you'd go down this branch. If you answered no, you'd go down this branch, these series of questions. Anyway, it's a really interesting dramatic form. And then the dictionary definition, and I'm going to read a very famous story that's essentially a dictionary definition. It's kind of a prose poem. Kathy Fish, who's a wonderful flash fiction writer, wrote this. And I'll just read it, and you guys can tell me what you think. Collective nouns for humans in the wild. A group of grandmothers is a tapestry. A group of toddlers a jubilance. See also a bewailing. A group of librarians is an enlightenment. A group of visual artists is a bioluminescence. A group of short story writers is a Flannery. A group of musicians is a band. A resplendence of poets, a beacon of scientists, a raft of social workers. A group of first responders is a valiance. A group of peaceful protesters is a dream. A group of special education teachers is a transcendence. A group of neonatal ICU nurses is a divinity. A group of hospice workers, a grace. Humans in the wild, gathered and feeling good, previously an exhilaration, now a target. A target of concert goers, a target of movie goers, a target of dancers. A group of school children is a target. So that's probably about 150 words.
Unbelievable.
And why do you say that, Rachel?
it's just it's an emotional journey, and it has so many aspects of the human experience and takes you from delight to playfulness to the mundane to an interest to a place of absolute devastation.
Yeah, that's it. I love how there's so much wordplay to start, and how, yeah, you use the word delight, how it really is delightful, which speaks to the human condition, right? We all hold these delightful possibilities. So it sets us up for the devastation. Again, your word, but that's what it is. And that repetition of the word target. So it becomes, I mean, when I said it is kind of like a prose poem, I have people say that, oh, this is a prose poem. And a lot of people, especially the shorter a story is, ask about that blurry line between a prose poem and a story. And there's no definition for each. I always say it's what the author calls it, you know. But I think like what's interesting about this, it does have character change. I think like Rachel said, it was a journey. And that's why I think it does have like change, conflict, change, desire, a fate. And it, you know, that line that it turns on, humans in the wild, gathered and feeling good, previously an exhilaration, now a target. Like suddenly the story pivots there. And like I said, that repetition of the word target. And I think like, you know, I just need to say that the reason I am attracted to the short form is I think I'm kind of a frustrated poet. I don't really write poetry, but I love being poetic with my writing. And I feel much more, I guess, solid, confident, whatever, as a prose writer. So these, especially 100-word stories too, it allows me to feel more poetry or express it more in this short form. And let's see, next one here. So this is the Mad Lib. I hope everybody's familiar with the Mad Lib form. Something that most kids, at least when I was growing up, I think it might have been part of my generation when it first started, but you basically get a story and there are a lot of blanks, and it'll say adjective, noun, adverb, whatever. And you don't show your friend the story, you ask them to tell you an adjective or an adverb or a noun, and then you end up with it random. And funny, just because they're words that don't belong where they're supposed to. So I'll read this one and think about what this means, because I think that this operates on two different layers. And both of them are interesting to pair together. So Mad Lib. Mom, when you were at the Ferris wheel Saturday, Ron bent the clock, so I couldn't hiccup. He put his kneecap over my eyebrow, so I couldn't even giggle. Then he stuck his elbows inside my ear. I juggled and juggled. Remember you asked why my teeth were so turquoise? I know you mix Ron with Fizzy, but really, he's a kangaroo, Mom. I don't snort you. I know how sugary you've been, but I fucking cartwheel him. Ron said if I knitted you, he would fly me, and besides, you would never whisper me. So, do you sniff me?
Good.
What do you think? Do you want me to give my interpretation?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, on the surface, the first time I read this, I thought it was a fun, playful, funny story of the Mad Lib form and just having fun with that and playing with language. But then when I read it a second and third time, I realized that there's an understory there. And it's about a girl being abused in some way. And what I think is brilliant about it is that she is unable to express what has happened to her. Like the Mad Lib form is not allowing her to express the truth. And so it's also a story of stifled communication, which often happens, of course, with abuse, that you can't tell your mother about it, that your mother thinks Ron is great, you know. So I think it's like, in the end, a devastating story. But I read it here tonight just to show how you can use these forms with flash fiction and really accomplish a lot with them, just because they're constraints, and they offer a different form of storytelling. This is another one, much more playful. Gosh, now I'm forgetting who did this. I think it was R.L. Maze's. She did the senior writer bingo, and as a senior writer, I really relate to it. So each box, of course, has a different sort of commentary on being a senior. I happen to love that plan to learn Canva is in the upper right corner. And then it's also in the bottom line here, still planning to learn Canva. That pretty much tells the whole story for me. I'm pretty sure I'll never learn Canva, but I am planning to. But anyway, it's a fun way to tell a story here because you're telling a story not about a specific character, but more, you are in a way, because I bet most of us who are seniors somehow relate to this. Like online event is past your bedtime. That's happened to me. Yeah, anyway. Remember newspapers, the last one. Not only do I remember them, I still subscribe to one. So here's an idea of different forms you can use, like things in drawers. I once went back home and my mother asked me to clean out my high school bedroom, and so I opened up these drawers that hadn't been opened up in like 20 years, and it was like an archaeological dig through who I was as a teenager. Just listing those things was a type of story. I love like setting up an FAQ section, and thinking about questions about grief or divorce or parenthood that no one asks aloud. So it could make it humorous in some way. It could be serious. The terms and conditions, like all these forms we deal with in life but don't think about. But what are the unread agreements of a marriage or a friendship? How would you write that in terms and conditions? Or like a user manual, how to operate your aging parent or caring for your anxious child. They could be tragic, comedic, anything you want them to be. So anyway, I just wanted to put a few of them out there for you. Um, and yeah, and so we could do one more prompt, or I could open it up to Q&A. What do you guys want? Or we could do Q&A and then a prompt to finish things. So my prompt is, this is my book, which I mentioned earlier, and this is the first photo in it. And so I thought I could offer a photo prompt, and then I would read what I wrote to this.
Wow.
But I don't know. We've got 26 minutes for Q&A, so I'll let Shirin make the call.
Oh, but now I'm so tempted by that photo. So, why don't we do your 5 minutes, 6 words to that photo, and then we'd love to see what you wrote, and then we can finish with
Okay. So not 6 words. I want you to write just write for 5 minutes, like a free write. So just and then you can take that free write home with you and rewrite it into a 100-word story. That's what I'll challenge you to do. Do a 100-word story. So here's the photo. It's the first photo in the book. And go for 5 minutes. We're about halfway through the 5 minutes. If you want to try to turn your story into a beginning, middle, and end, this would be a good time to turn it towards the end. And we're already at 5 minutes. Anybody want an extra minute? You can also finish it when you get home. I will do a reading. Here's the story I wrote. And again, these are all linked stories. So there's two characters, Johnny and Don, driving through the Southwest, fleeing from something I won't tell you about. But let me think. So Johnny is the narrator of this book. You know, they're both in their, 20s. I guess we'll say mid-20s. How do you describe a person? Is it their smell, the rhythm of their breaths, the way they pinch their lips without even knowing it, the crimp of their brow? Or is it the force of their longing, the determination of their steps, their wild joy? You can feel a person, can't you? Feel them even when they're in another room, even when they're gone. I think we all possess something inside us like electricity, a pulse, an energy. You feel it, but you can't see it. It's there, even when it's not. I suppose that's a soul. I know that none of us sees quite the same world. I know that as much as I touch and hold, grasp and yearn. I know that I'm alone even when I'm not alone. And yet there's always something beckoning us in the clouds. Something like a scent in the air. Something out there in the distance. That's the way I think of dawn now. Out there in the distance. So yeah, this is the photo that led to that story, which basically led to the title. So yeah, I'm happy to take questions from y'all. I will stop my screen share and enlarge all of you.
Thank you. Thank you, Grant. This has been just great. It's been so much fun and you know, now I can't wait to go work on some more of these short forms and hopefully they'll add up to a long form.
Yeah, that's the way my novel has worked, actually. It's a lot of linked short stories like this. Thank you for the heart, Linda.
Perfect.
I think
Right.
Raji has a
You're
question.
welcome.
I do. I wanted to go back to Mad Lib, which you shared. And
Yeah.
when I first read it, I kind of thought it was interesting, a little odd. Then when you read it, it was, which you did beautifully, I thought it was amusing. And
Hmm.
then you interpreted it, and I was kind of shocked. So I
Hmm.
wanted to know how you went from your initial reading of finding it amusing to the darkness you saw in that. And yeah, what was your path to that final
Yeah,
interpretation?
actually, somebody told me they were like, "You didn't read that right," and I went back to it, and I felt really bad that I hadn't read it as carefully as it should have been read because it was, I think it's pretty obviously about a very serious subject. But I think like after that, like thinking about how Mad Lib has this veneer of childhood play, and then how abuse, oftentimes we don't have a language for the things that are taboo, especially children. And so this child was trying to talk to her mom and tell her what happened, but there wasn't the language. So I thought it was an amazingly brilliant piece.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I also wonder, Grant, when I read it, I thought that maybe there was actually even one more layer than that maybe the child had said it, you know? You hear so
Mm,
often of mothers who just can't hear it because it means them taking apart their whole world. So
you're
maybe
right.
that those little pieces were actually like interference that kind of got
You're right.
the
Yeah, that's a great interpretation.
And along those lines, with what you're saying, Shirin, the way I read it when I was listening to it and reading it, and I felt um, playful at first, and then I got that sick feeling
Hmm.
that you get. And it did have that feeling of that children often think they've been clear about what they've communicated also to the people that are supposed to be keeping them safe. And part of that is might be that somebody's not listening, but also part of that is like just developmentally their limitations and this idea when we're little kids that we almost think our parents or our caretakers can read our minds.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah. Well, I think like that's one reason I like this form is because it's so much about the gaps and what's been left out and that art of submission. That to me, that's where it's like existentially relevant to me is that I think humans, we live in the gaps maybe more than we know. And there's always the question of what is said and what is understood. And we all quest for understanding. That's just what it means to be human. We love being understood or feeling that we're understood. Yet there is always a gap there, right? Just inherently.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Does anyone else have any questions for Grant?
I've answered everything you need to know from me. Done it all. Eric, and then Shonda. Eric first, yeah.
Grant, do you have any favorite examples of um, full length linked flash fiction or linked short stories?
Hmm. The form actually goes back a long way. Oh gosh, I'm spacing, but Sherwood Anderson's Winesburg, Ohio, I think was maybe one of the earliest examples way back in the 20s. And I thought what's brilliant about that one is it's about this small town. So you just I grew up in a small town in the Midwest, and so you just like the town is expanding and kind of narrowing at the same time as these different characters come in and out of the stories. And then I think Sandra Cisneros' House on Mango Street has that
Oh,
same flavor. Um, I'm really bad with authors, and Justin Torres, We the Animals is a recent one. Yeah, and it's very brilliant. So yeah, or yeah, I mean those are a few I would check out. They're all different. Um, it's becoming an increasingly popular form. Not that it's well, there's like all it's Olive Kittredge, right? The Yeah, so those aren't flash pieces, but they are linked stories. And Jennifer Egan, Goon Squad, her like what's fascinating about that is they're linked stories, but some people think it's a novel, and some people call it a story collection. And I don't think she's ever named what it is, and maybe it doesn't matter. But the stories all build on each other and deal with the same characters, so that's a rich tradition too. So I think there are a lot of different ways to define it.
And
Yeah, go
and
ahead.
and Peter Orner's book, Last Car Over the Sagamore Bridge. Did you read that,
I
Grant?
haven't read that. No.
Yeah. Also kind of hangs. I think that they called it a novel, but it's kind of it's all about the same characters, but each yeah, it's beautifully ambiguous in its form, I think.
Beautifully ambiguous. I think that's a key to successful flash fiction. I always say a lot of forms, ambiguity isn't a craft tool, but with flash fiction, ambiguity is a craft tool.
Mhm.
I think, Shonda, if I'm saying that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, you had a question?
It's sort of a process question, or not necessarily how you do it, but a way to do it, or how you do it. Do you start with, you talked about starting with the larger story and paring it down. Do you ever start with just a theme or an idea and then write from scratch to try and stay constrained, or do you like to, like, sort of the idea of the messy first draft, just write it long and then
Uh,
pare it down?
yeah, I've always been intrigued by those who write long and then go way shorter, but I've never really done that.
Mhm.
Like the Yasunori Kawabata
Yeah.
example I gave. I'm fascinated by that, especially just because he had a Nobel Prize winning novel that was
Yeah.
beautiful and seemed perfect, and yet it wasn't perfect in his mind. So he was looking for the essence and the distillation of it, almost like it was bothering him for all those years. And again, like Gleanings of Snow Country, it's a different version of the story, not just a synopsis of the story. So I usually just, gosh, I feel like my writing is just so random and largely intuitive, and I keep a notebook and I write random thoughts in it, and sometimes a sentence or a metaphor or a character comes out, and I'm like, okay, I'll spend the next 10 years writing a novel about that, or I'll spend the next week writing a little 100-word story. It's usually longer than a week, though. These things are really hard to write, so yeah, I don't have any great thoughts on process, other than I have been very intrigued by intuition, especially as I get older, because I think we devalue it. We tend to devalue it in our culture. We want everything to be empirical and to have data behind it and all that. But I
Yeah.
think like intuition is a very real thing, and it's something that we speak of sometimes mystically as if it's just a gut feeling, but it's much more than that. Like intuition is built through years of study, study of yourself, study of the world around you. So I believe more and more in intuition. It's just, for me, it's a more fun way to live and write.
Yeah. Well, I'm coming from the novel or would-be novelist genre, if you will, and I've done a couple of things where I've had a scene that I'm not happy with because it seems to meander. When I just cut it down to a prose poem, just take out everything until it loses meaning, and then put the last word back.
Yeah,
I have found that has been a really great way to then build it back up to a you know more than just prose poem, back into prose. But it's a great way to get rid of all the stuff.
that sounds like a great process to me. Like one of the best the best advice I've ever received for writing endings of stories, which are really hard to write, I think, generally. And I think what happens with me, at least, but I think a lot of writers, is that you want the ending to be so perfect, right? And you ended up working so hard on it that you keep adding things.
Yeah.
And so the best advice I got on endings was just chop the last 2 or 3 paragraphs and see how it sounds. And that really works for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's great advice.
Yeah. I can't remember who said that. some unnamed person. I should just start claiming it for myself at this point.
You should.
Any other questions?
Just wondering what's happening with your novel.
Oh yeah, so that old Doom novel is still doomed. I think about resurrecting it or pulling it out, but I really don't have time for it. And I'm actually really glad at this point that it stayed in the doomed category. Some things just aren't meant to be in the world, and it never quite came together. And like I said, I think in the end I didn't believe in it enough, even though I'd spent 10 years with it. So it was like a nice kind of initial detour, and then a totally like 4-lane highway to go on to the flash fiction kind of aesthetic. And so I do have a novel that is born out of flash fiction, like we talked about link stories. And so when I wrote that collection, Fissures, I had these two characters, Gerard and Celeste, and maybe 20 of the 100 word stories in that were about them. Not with any intention, it was just like they kept fascinating me. And they seem to have resonated with the people who read that book. So I did link them together, and I didn't keep them all 100 word stories, and I added stuff and made them into a more conventional link story that was 3 or 4,000 words. And that was in all the comfort Sin can provide. But then I became more and more curious about them as characters. And so I do have a novel that called The Letters, based on them. And it's type of flash novel in that it's an epistolary form. So most of the novel is letters written but not sent. And most letters, are very short, and these become almost like journal, because they're never sent. It's almost like a diary of forbidden love. So yeah. So anyway, it's morphed into a type of link story, and so I'm really into it. Yeah. Somebody else had their hand up, and then it went down. Maybe
Monica did. Monica, do you
Monica.
want to ask?
Okay. This may be too long, too long a question. Anyway, what do you think about stories that are not a linked short story book, but linked stories to linked flash stories to create a short story?
Yeah,
Is that
I love it.
somebody's done or?
Oh yeah, a lot of people have done that, and like what I just mentioned with Gerard and Celeste, the two characters, like the 20 separate sorts 100 word stories, they were very easy to link together. And I added new stories and linked them. I didn't keep everything 100 words, but I love writing like that. I love white space in a story or a novel. I love how that makes it more, it's like a stanza. So these little stories are like, little poems. And yeah, it's just a different way of writing because you're writing so much with the gaps and so much with what's left out, and that's an art unto itself. It's almost impossible to teach. I think you just have to read a lot and practice it a lot. Yeah.
I just wrote a story like that, and
Yeah.
with with a character I could not write a story about. I tried many times to write her story, and it took and it sort of goes from the time she goes to college to the time her daughter goes to college, and it's just 3 flashes in a short.
Sounds great.
So yeah,
Yeah,
it's
it's a
fun to
funny form.
write.
It's hard, I think, sometimes to trust that you've told the story, because it does veer more towards poetry and what's left out, and it's harder to trust. For instance, if you want to publish it, an editor will get it.
Yeah.
I don't know what to
I'm
say. I mean,
Well,
sometimes they don't. They don't get it.
I think that we should leave alone the whole discussion about editors and ambiguity right from the start. Right from the
Right.
start.
Exactly.
But before we let you go, Grant, I'm going to take you off the craft topic, and ask you and just ask you about something else that you had said that you've been doing and that I wanted an update on just personally, which is the America's Next Great Author. So how's your
Mm.
TV show coming along?
Yeah, I mean, you know what's funny about most creative projects is that they, oftentimes at least, hopefully, they have this life where for a while they flourish and then for a while they don't flourish. Doors close, you know? I mean, there's so many novels or stories about people trying to get something published where the door opens and the door closes. And so it's a long story actually, so I'll just spare you the details. But we had Canopy, which was the kind of like Netflix for libraries. They had agreed to fund it, at least 50% of the funding. We were looking for the other 50% of the funding, and then very unfortunately, Canopy like had budget cuts because of a lot of what the budget cuts that Trump did to libraries. Canopy is a subscription service for libraries, so they basically lost a lot of money, and so we're redefining the show. I have another show that I've thought of, and I'm working with a different group of people that I actually am more enchanted by at the moment. So yeah, maybe the America's Next Great Author was my doomed novel, and
They're doing TV
and
programs.
I'm moving on. This is a great lesson of the creative life. The you face many dooms things, at least I have, and you learn how to live with the doom and move on.
I think that the another way of framing that though is that I kind of had a private chuckle about how this evening was supposed to be about brevity, but I looked at your bio and I thought, oh my God, it's gonna take me half an hour just to introduce him. You have done
Yeah.
so much, and so a big congratulations and a huge thank you for taking the time out of your very busy schedule to come and talk to us. This was absolutely great. And I look forward to having you back in another few years when maybe you'll be talking to us about
And
TV production instead.
I'll come back in the next pandemic. Yeah,
Let's not put it like that.
yeah. No, I'd love to talk about anything. I just want to name a couple things. If anyone's interested in memoir, Memoir Nation is an organization that I started with my podcasting partner, Brooke Warner. So listen to Memoir Nation, the podcast, or join the organization. It's free, but there are also membership levels. And also, on the subject of brevity, we're hosting not Memoir Nation, but the Flash Fiction Institute, which is another one of my ventures. We're hosting National Flash Fiction Month this month, and
Fabulous.
so we're providing a bunch of different stuff. So sign up for the Flash Fiction Institute Substack, or follow us on Instagram or Facebook or Substack, and yeah. And then Memoir Nation is the organization that I run with Brooke Warner, who's also my co-hosting partner. And our podcast used to be called Right Minded, but now it's Memoir Nation. And we get an amazing number of great guests. I have to like do a little bit of a brag here. We've got like Roxane Gay. We're going to interview her next week. We've interviewed nearly Mary Carr, Danny Shapiro, Pico Iyer, like so many great writers. So yeah, it. People have told me it's good. I'll leave you with that. People have told me it's good. Yeah,
Fabulous. Oh, and then unsubmittable, you're just Grant Faulkner, right?
yeah,
Okay.
yep.
Good.
On Substack, on Substack.
Substack, right?
Yeah,
Substack. Okay.
yeah.
Well, thank you very much for being with us tonight.
Thank you. It was fun.
Thank
Okay,
you. Good night, everybody.
keep writing.
See you next
Bye
month.
bye.
Bye.